President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has expressed appreciation to the Nigerian Governors Forum following its unanimous endorsement of the revised tax reform bills currently under consideration by the National Assembly. In a statement issued by presidential spokesman Bayo Ononuga, the president commended the governors for what he called their bold leadership and commitment to fostering unity among leaders nationwide. The governors had on Thursday, January 17, also approved the contentious shift to a derivation-based value-added tax model. In the meantime, the lawmaker representing Borno South Senatorial District, Aliu Ndume, has kicked against the 30% derivation sharing formula of VAT in the updated tax reform proposal endorsed by the 36 state governors. In a related development, the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, Taiwo Yedele, says the tax reform bills currently before the National Assembly are expected to be passed into law in the first quarter of 2025, while the implementation is billed to begin on July 1. Oyedele said his committee had no objection to the new value-added tax sharing formula proposed by the Nigerian Governors Forum, adding that the worst was behind Nigerians, with the good results being yielded by the ongoing economic reforms of the Tinubu administration. He also noted that before President Tinubu assumed office in May 2023, Nigeria was living in a window dress economy and printing paper money to spend. In another development, Nigeria has officially joined the BRICS group of countries as a ninth partner country alongside Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Thailand, Uganda, and Uzbekistan. This development has provoked widespread concern among economic experts over what it means to be a partner country. They have also questioned if that is the best for Nigeria's global standing. BRICS is an intergovernmental organization and originally an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It subsequently accepted other countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, and the United Arab Emirates into its fold. Now I'm being joined for an overview of these developments on the tax reform bills and Nigeria's status in BRICS by Dr. Muda Yusuf, Chief Executive Officer of Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise and a former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Great to have you on This Day Live, Dr. Yusuf. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yusuf. Well, you know, quite a lot of back and forth when the tax reform bills were introduced. And the major argument then by the Governors Forum, by the Northern Elders Forum, by some other stakeholders was that there was not enough consultation. Now we have been told all of a sudden that the governors are now backing the president and they've endorsed the proposals by the Oyedele Committee. How significant is this, in your view?
Well, it is very significant because the tax reform bills are very essential to ensure an improvement in our tax system. Because we have quite a number of archaic laws, some of them dating back to 20, 30 years, which had not been reviewed. We had issues around multiplicity of taxes. We have issues around the optimization of revenue, inadequate leveraging of technology, and to some extent, even inadequate incentives. And the fact that we have quite a number of players in the economy who are currently outside the tax net. And because there's a need to optimize revenue without necessarily increasing taxes, I think those reforms to that extent were very, very essential and necessary. I think the major challenge we had was that the whole exercise had two major components. There is a technical component which has to do with refining and improving the tax system, the legislations, optimization, use of technology. Then there is the political component, which initially was grossly, underestimated. And that has to do with issue of revenue allocation. And in my view, when we talk about reforming a tax system, it's a completely different thing from addressing the issues of revenue allocation. Unfortunately, somehow we lump the two together. I think that is where the issue, emanated from, all the crises and the contentions and all of that. Because revenue allocation issues are largely political. And unless you build a very robust political consensus around it, you may not be able to move forward. And that is what the Governors Forum had done. The political dimension of the whole process, which was creating an impediment to the entirety of the reform process, the tax reform process, has been substantially addressed through the consultative platforms of the Governors Forum. And because of the impact and the influence of the governors on members of the National Assembly, I think this will pave the way to make much quicker and substantial progress on the whole tax reform exercise. So for me, I think what has happened is a major development. The issue is now is not whether the VAT allocation is right or wrong. It's about democratizing the process. And that is extremely very, very important. And I think we have crossed a major hurdle. We have seen a major heavy lifting of some of the barriers to this process by the governor. So we must commend the process. I must also commend the president for agreeing to this compromise, because this was not the original content of what the president proposed through the tax committee. So for me, it's a win-win. It's a good compromise, and now I think we can move forward. Of course, there are still pockets of issues to be addressed, issues like the TETFUND, issues like what the NLC too has been raising about tax exemptions, issues around the free trade zones, and issues around even the proposal to increase or restore the current level of company tax. Because the committee has recommended a reduction in company tax. And those of us in business were already excited about that. But now, the committee has said that that reduction will no longer hold. So these are still pockets of engagement that will take place as we progress with the engagement at the level of the National Assembly. But so far, so good.
Okay, but what is the big gain in this? I mean, you deal with, private enterprises, small and medium-scale enterprises and all that. What's the big gain for private enterprise in what has now been proposed? What additional amendments would you like to see?
The big gain is that most of the provisions in the tax base, most of it are private sector friendly. And those provisions have never been in any serious contention. Because we are talking about removing tax laws that are archaic. We are talking about removing multiplicity of taxes. We are talking about fresh incentives for small businesses, although I'm hoping that we can expand the scope of those incentives for small businesses, because 50 million turnover these days is not anything much if you really want to support small businesses. But that is still something. We are talking about leveraging technology, because no matter how we look at it, efficient tax administration increases revenue. And when revenue increases, of course, it has the probability of impacting on the capacity of government to also support the private sector. But the major reservation is the fact that, we already have a proposal by the committee that the company income tax should be reduced to at least 25%, I think, over the next 3 years or so. But the governors are saying that that should not be. So that, of course, is something that the private sector will have to engage in. But generally, I think it's something that is very positive for the Nigerian private sector. But I know that as we go along, because no reform is perfect, and reform exercises a work in progress. It's a continuous process. You continue to reform a system in the light of realities. For instance, I do know that we have, at least based on data, we have almost 50% of our economy is informal. So again, we need to worry about how this large informal sector will fit into these current reforms. Of course, if you go to all our major markets across the country, whether you are talking of Balogun market or Ariaria market or Aba market or Nisha market or Kanu market, nobody is talking about VAT. They don't even understand what you mean by VAT. They don't understand what you mean by reforms on VAT. They don't understand what you mean by withholding tax. You go to Alaba market or even those who are selling cars and things along the road all over. So there's a need to also study our own economic environment properly and continuously fine-tune the process to ensure that we have a system that is fit for purpose. But I must say that so far, what has happened in the last few weeks is a major improvement in the process. And I think that both businesses, the individuals, and governments will be much better for it. Because, just as I said, some of those elements required very robust political consensus. And we have seen a major step at crossing that hurdle, which has been driven by the governors.
Okay, as positive as you think the latest development is, there are certain groups, certain persons who have objected. ASU, for example, is complaining about TETFUND that you mentioned earlier, saying that, look, there's no clarity as to the terminal clause in terms of what is being recommended. And then you have Senator Ali Ndume saying that the 13% derivation that government is now talking about, is still too high. That if derivation for oil-bearing communities is 13%, that it should not be higher than that 13%. And in terms of FIRS collection of VAT, it shouldn't be more than 1%. What do you think? Do you think these are issues that the public hearings can still revisit?
Well, the position of the Governors Forum is that the sunset provision for TETFUND, for NASENI, and for NIDA in the tax legislations, in the proposed tax legislation, should be removed. In other words, because the committee has proposed a gradual phasing out of TETFUND, NASENI, and all of that. Again, if you look at the impact of TETFUND on our tertiary institutions, in terms of infrastructure development, it has been very phenomenal. Nobody can dismiss that easily. You need to visit our public tertiary institutions. You will see the impact of TETFUND. So for me, I will agree with ASU. This is not the kind of organ that you just want to drop just like that. Because it will be extremely difficult to find a budgetary process that can replicate the kind of impact that TETFUND had on our tertiary institutions in terms of infrastructure development. So I think that requires some rethinking, which is what the ASU was saying, which is also what the governors were saying. So the governors were not in support of drawing the curtain or phasing out TETFUND, NASENI, and all of that. And I think it's a very valid position. Concerning the position of Senator Ali Ndume, I think there's a need to have a clearer understanding of the derivation. The derivation component in this new tax proposal is 30% of the proportion that is on derivation. Because the total proportion of derivation is 30%. So what we are saying is not as if the derivation is on the entire thing. The pool of funds under the VAT revenue, 50% of it will go into equality of states. 20% will go to population. It's only 30% that will now be distributed according to derivation, unlike what you have in the oil-producing area. The 13% in oil-producing area is on the entire totality of the oil revenue. So it's a whole lot of difference You know, this one applies only to 30% of the VAT revenue. So I think Senator Eileen Dume needs to also ensure that we are comparing like with like. So that for me, I think, is the position. I don't think there is anything, any major issue around that. And in any case, of course, there will be dissenting views. What is important is that we get a critical mass to support this process. And coming from the Governors Forum, and I'm sure that a lot of consultations will have preceded what the governors announced. So I'm very optimistic that we should be able to go forward with what the governors have proposed. But I will also advise, because there's a component in the tax bill about protecting SMEs, exempting them from taxes and so on. The threshold that has been proposed is 50 million. 50 million these days is not a lot of money. The amount of money spent on diesel, even by some SMEs in a year, is more than 50 million. So if you really want to protect SMEs, I think that threshold should move up to about 100 million in the light of current day realities of prices. So that will just be my own suggestion as we proceed with the subsequent conversations with the National Assembly. Okay,
before we move away from this subject, well, all the tension that was created, you know, Progressive Governors Forum, Northern Governors Forum, other stakeholders complaining that they were not consulted. Mr. Taiwo Yedele was on this same program, and he said, look, they consulted 120 stakeholders and more, and that even the Governors Forum, you know, gave them appointments and didn't show up 4 times, eventually attended to them for just about 50 minutes. Do you think that the policy was rushed? Do you think that the policy-making process should have been slowed down to have even reached this point before the executive arm of government went to the National Assembly? Do you see some omission in the policy formulation process that could have taken us to this point instead of all that up and down, back and forth, you know, controversies that the policies, the reform bills generated?
You see, the way I see it is that, first, for you to be able to interrogate the contents of the bill, it requires a lot of rigor and a lot of understanding, because some of those provisions are very technical, and there, in terms of volume, we run into hundreds of pages. So if there is no proper rigor to go through it, it's very easy not to take some of those provisions seriously. So my feeling is that the Governors Forum, at the beginning, at the onset of all this process, did not apply the desired kind of rigor to read through properly and understand the implications of this. Because all this issue did not start until the Northern governors, you know, started to raise alarm, particularly about this revenue allocation issue. So I think it was the absence of rigor in going through those provisions. It's not so much that it was rushed. Secondly, tax reform exercise, the way it was presented, had 2 major components. There is a technical component, which the committee has done a very good work of. But issues of revenue allocation are purely political. It's not something that the committee can handle. It's something that requires political consensus, and it's something for the politicians to handle. You know, that for me, I think, is where some you know, omissions must have taken place. Because when you are reforming a tax, reforming the tax is different from reforming allocation of revenue. They are completely different issues. So the mixture of those issues is what has brought some complications to this. But happily, the political side of the issue has now been substantially addressed. So that is my understanding of what had played out up until this point.
Okay, Dr. Yusuf, let's talk about BRICS. Nigeria becoming a partner country with BRICS. Now, some experts have objected to this. They say, Nigeria, given our strategic and important place in Africa and geopolitics, that we shouldn't be a partner country. We should be a member. After all, South Africa has been a member since, you know, and then why are we at the same level as Algeria, Egypt, you know, Kazakhstan, you know, and those Uganda, those other countries that are named partner countries, whereas we're a very important emerging economy. Do you think that's a problem, or the fact that we have been admitted, invited as a partner country is good enough for us?
Well, for me, I think it's a good first step. Because when this whole idea of BRICS started, I'm not sure we showed so much interest in it. And many other countries didn't show much interest. Because at the onset, it came across like a liberation movement, in quotes. You know, like a movement that seeks to liberate itself from the Western influence. The influence of the West on the financial system, on the economy, on security, on even the global diplomacy. Because you have countries like Russia and China leading the whole process, and you know their position vis-a-vis the West. That was the perception of the whole BRICS group. But I think with time, those perceptions were now changing. Because for me, I think we showed interest a bit late. But the fact that we were invited even as a partner country, I think is still some good recognition. And I believe it's also a good first step even to becoming a full member of that group. And in any case, that does not also preclude us from even taking advantage of the opportunities of interacting with the members of that group. You know, from the point of view of trade, from the point of view of investment, from the point of view of capital, even from the point of view of diplomacy. So for me, I think it's a recognition, and I think it's also a step towards even becoming a full member. I think Ethiopia is a member, Egypt is a member. These countries are not so much bigger than us in any way, you know. So for me, I think it's a first step, and of course, we can also even begin to take advantage of the opportunities that that group offers, so even to the full members of
okay, do we stand to lose anything, considering the fact that some of the key members of the BRICS, they're seeking an alternative international financial system. They are seeking, you know, new centers of power within geopolitical formations, Russia, China, for example. And Nigeria is also a very good partner with some of the Western powers with which, you know, these countries have issues. Iran is even a member of the BRICS. What do we stand to lose? Well, I
think it's a very delicate balance. I mean, UAE, for instance, is also a member of BRICS. And I know that UAE also has very good relationship with the West. You know, so I think it's a question of ensuring some balance around this. It's also not so much of a good thing to have this kind of unipolar kind of international system. Because the dominance of the West on the global scene, whether you're talking about security, you are talking about economy, you are talking about finance, and all of that, that dominance also is not such a good thing. So for me, from that point of view, it's not necessarily just being antagonistic to the West. I think some of this moderation will have to be brought into BRICS, but it's just to ensure that at least there is also a fairly comparative platform, you know, to the G7 and all these people, all these countries in the West, because you need that kind of balance, really, in the global economic order, to ensure that there is also mutual respect, not for one or two countries to see themselves as, you know, pushing other countries around, that kind of hegemony, kind of disposition. I think we have gone past that. I mean, look at what is happening in the UN, in the Security Council. Even for very important things that the whole world feels strongly about, one or two countries can just come and veto it. You know, those kind of things, we can't sustain those kind of things for long. So for me, I think it's a question of ensuring a very good balance without necessarily appearing to be, you know, completely antagonistic to the West. Because, of course, we still have good relationship with the West. But there's also a lot to gain from this other group.
Okay, two more things very quickly before I let you go. We're talking about private enterprise. Now, around the U-type period, the pump price of fuel went down because Dangote refinery reduced the pump price, and then Nigerians were buying fuel at less than 1,000 naira. But now, we're told as a result of pressure in the crude oil market, the benchmark Brent, now selling at about $80 to $81. Now, Dangote refinery has now increased its depot price. And by the time the independent petroleum marketers, the retail outlets, add the cost of logistics, now we're buying fuel at over 1,000 naira to 1,150 naira. And it looks like with the crisis in the Middle East, with other issues that may come up during the year, is this market forces really at work? And where does that leave the private sector and ordinary people doing small businesses and all of that? And where does that leave the refineries that we say are now working? Because now everybody is saying, oh, it's Dangote refinery that has increased its depot price. What of the refineries too? We all thought that by now, some people were even saying they should sell fuel to us at 300 naira per liter. Was the
well, I wish that was possible. That could have been great. That could have been great. But the reality is that even Dangote, which is the largest, biggest refinery we have now, is importing a substantial part of the crude because the NNPC is not in a position to supply the crude adequately to meet its needs because of all manner of commitments, and now NNPC also now has its own refineries. So to the extent that Dangote continues also to import substantially its crude, I mean, that has to reflect in the price. Because the Dangote refinery is a business. And the cost variables will influence price. What could have been more impactful in terms of moderating price and in part of ensuring that Dangote is able to moderate price is for us to be able to supply the crude domestically and substantially to meet the crude demands of these refineries. But we have a major constraint. We don't have the capacity to supply that. So it's extremely difficult to expect anything different. What the government can do is just to ensure that we look at our gamut of our fiscal policies and as much as possible ease the cost of the delivery of these items by the domestic refineries to the people. If we need to ease some taxation, if we need to remove some levies, if we need to remove some fees, so that the landing costs in terms of production will be much less. But in terms of the fundamental factors affecting price, like the feedstock, there is very little anybody can expect, from the Dangote refinery or any other refinery, particularly in this deregulated regime. The other alternative is for the government to also fast-track alternative means of transportation, alternative energy sources, so that we reduce our dependence on this fossil fuel. We have been talking about CNG, we have been talking about alternatives, so we have even been talking about ensuring that we have a more effective public transportation. All of these things are critical to complement whatever reform is going on around the oil and gas and all this deregulation thing. But these are the ways, these are the things you can do to actually ensure that the impact of these increases are not too much, on the average citizens. For me, these are the things to do. And of course, electricity. If you have constant electricity, the demand for some of this fuel will also be reduced. So one way or the other, there has to be some support, particularly for electricity, in terms of subsidy. Nobody can talk of abuse or smuggling to neighboring countries or all of these things when you come to electricity subsidy. It's not like fuel that somebody can put in a truck and be taken to Benin Republic. So there has to be some support, significant government support for energy, particularly electricity. And other forms of energy require fiscal policy support in terms of tax concession, concession on levies, concession on import duty, concession on their spare parts. Those things can also happen with other sources of energy. For me, I think that will be the way to go to respond to what is happening in terms of the global oil price.
Your point about support. Nigerians will say palliatives. They will say some other terms. Given the prevailing objective conditions, are we at the mercy of market forces?
Well, in a way, we are at the mercy of market forces. But my position is that we need to define boundaries of policies or boundaries of reforms. Because no economic reform is perfect. When we get to the point where market forces is unduly hurting the citizens, the government has to step in. Because in economics, there's what you call market failure. And what that means is that market cannot deliver everything. Where market cannot deliver, government intervention becomes imperative. That is why government has to support education, for instance. You can't leave education to market forces. You can't leave our medical institutions to market forces. You can't completely leave electricity to market forces. You can't leave agriculture to market forces. You can't even leave manufacturing entirely to market forces. Because if you go to other parts of the world that are making progress, government is supporting all these critical areas. The same thing with public transportation. You can't leave public transportation to market forces. You can't leave it only to the private sector, which is what we have now, which is why the citizens, each time you have this fueling, this is why the citizens complain a lot. Unlike in many other climes, there is heavily subsidized public transportation option, either in terms of railways or in terms of all these high-capacity buses. That is the way to deal with the fallout or the downsides of market forces. Okay. So government must always stand ready to support the vulnerable within the context of a market-driven economy.
Okay, Dr. Yusuf, please just hold on. We have this breaking news. It's already on the screen. Let me take that, and then I will come back to you and ask you the last set of questions. This is breaking news. News just coming in indicates that 3 Israeli hostages have been freed, marking the start of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The hostages, identified as Romy Gonen, Doron Steinbrecher, and Emily Damari, were handed over to the Red Cross in Gaza and are being transported to Israeli forces. The ceasefire officially began after a nearly 3-hour delay caused by Hamas failing to provide the names of the first set of hostages, according to the Israeli military. A total of 33 hostages classified as humanitarian cases, women, children, and men over 50 are expected to be released in the first phase of the 6-week deal. 2 Americans, Kate Siegel and Sergei Dekel-Chen, are on the list but are not scheduled for release on the first day. U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner confirmed. This is breaking news in the Qatar-U.S. brokered ceasefire deal between Hamas and the Israelis since the crisis began on October 7, 2023. And we have Egypt playing a role also, Qatar also playing a role, and this deal is in 3 phases. This is the very first phase and the very first day, and this is the agreement. But let's go back to Dr. Muda Yusuf. Dr. Muda Yusuf, I don't know whether you've been following the crisis in the Middle East and this ceasefire that President Biden and the Americans brokered, which President-elect Donald Trump says, well, he imposed on the Israelis to agree to it. But this has been on the table for a very long time, even with the United Nations not being able to make much progress. But now we've reached a turning point in this, and the first set of hostages have been released, 3 from the Palestinian side, and then Israel is expected to also on this day 1 release a total of 90 prisoners, including persons who have spent over 15 years in Israeli prisons. Do you have any thoughts on this? Although it's international relations.
No, it's a good development. It's a very good development. It's a very good development, which at least we all welcome. And we hope that more progress will be made with respect to the issues of this Israeli and Hamas and all of that, and also even between Russia and Ukraine. But one of our expectations under the Trump presidency is the reduction in this geopolitical tension. And that will bring a lot of relief even to the global economy. So we're expecting that beyond this Israel and Hamas, Trump will also be able to prevail on Russia and Ukraine, to ensure that we see a moderation in this geopolitical tension. And we're able to make progress with that. I think it will be good for the global economy. To also accelerate the recovery of many economies around the world, especially from the point of view of energy prices and from the point of view of food prices as well. That is our expectation under the Trump presidency, and those are some of the positive expectations under Trump, and we are beginning to see some indications of that. So it's a very good development.
Very good. Well, you have talked about President Trump, who is going to be inaugurated tomorrow. Can I just ask you, do you think a Trump presidency is good news for Africa, for economies in Africa? What do you think we should be looking at? Particularly as President Trump has said, by tomorrow, he's going to sign off on about dozens of executive orders, including trade, including immigration, including far-reaching policies that will indicate that, well, Trump is back and that America is ready to take on the world. If you could just spend a few minutes on the expectations, and then we'll wrap this up quickly.
Well, I think for me, there are upsides and downsides. The upsides are what I've mentioned about the kind of influence that Trump will bring to bear on the current geopolitical tension around the world, particularly in the Middle East and between Russia and Ukraine. I'm expecting that with the kind of influence he has, he'll be able to bring some calm, some reduction in the tension in those two areas. That will be positive for the global economy generally. Now, on the immigration thing, I think from what I heard lately, there seems to be a slight shift in position. And the shift that I noticed was that those to be deported immediately are those who have records of crime. That's undocumented immigrants, that's records of crime. And we are told that they also run into even 1 million or so. So I think those are the ones that will be dealt with. For the other larger number of undocumented immigrants, there is no clear position yet, because I'm sure they're also being cautious of the implications of deporting so many of them, for the economy of the United States. So from that point of view, that is some comfort. Otherwise, if there is a massive deportation, of course, we have quite a number of our citizens in Nigeria and other African countries who are undocumented, who are also in the United States. And of course, implications for diaspora remittances and all of those things are also there. Then on trade war, those things also have implications for the global supply chain, because it's going to disrupt a whole lot of things around supply chains. Of course, I'm sure US will pay some price for it, because by the time you take that kind of step, it's going to have implications for the US economy. It's going to, spur inflation in the US economy and all that. But generally for the global economy, the supply chains will be disrupted. And of course, China and some other countries may now begin to even look for other partners. And that may also be positive for some of us in Africa, because they will now be trying to cut other bilateral relationships between Nigeria, EU countries, Canada, China, and all of that. So they'll be looking towards other countries to improve bilateral relations. So that again may be an upside. So there are positives and there are negatives, with respect to this incoming Trump administration.
Well, on that note, Dr. Muda Yusuf, I would like to thank you very much for joining us on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show. Thank you very much indeed for your time and insights.